Okay, if we're going to shoot in practical locations, like I'm here in my den in my house, one of the prettiest sources that we could choose, I think, would be window light. You obviously are working with what's available coming from the sun. It's a nice big source coming through the window. It's wrapping very nicely. In order to get this same kind of diffused wrapping effect, we would have to use a very large artificial source on stage, for instance, and put it through, I think, probably a couple of different layers of diffusion. Large frame diffusion and smaller frame diffusion, or diffusion directly on the fixture itself, and then large frame diffusion with what I call giving it a little air. In other words, some space in between the source and the diffusion panel to allow the softness to sort of expand in volume and fill the space with a larger presence of light. So if I'm dealing with a light that is emitting volume into a room, and that window is 4 feet tall and 6 feet wide, that's a tremendous presence in that space. And so to use a small fixture like a lamp or even a small conventional really is not going to give you the same sense of the reality of that kind of volume. In other words, there's a huge light source outside. It's sky and light reflecting off of maybe the neighbor's house coming into the window, and it's reflecting off of the ground. It's a large, redirected, soft, indirect collection of light coming through the window and giving me just this general wrapping, low contrast, high dynamic image. In other words, my shadow side here, well, it is falling into shadow, is certainly not the same extreme, and there's certainly not a hard transition like there would be with a smaller, sourcey conventional fixture or even a lamp that would generate a much harder transition and a much deeper shadow to this side. The volume of light, because it's big and diffused, it's just sort of wafting into the room and filling that space, and the rate in which it's falling off is much more subtle to the eye. It's the most beautiful kind of light that I think we can aspire to, and I like to show my students images from Vermeer in particular, because he was specifically concerned with the quality of light that he could get from a window in his studio, and he used that same backdrop for a lot of different images in his portfolio overall. So I can think of a number of different subjects that were photographed under the same kind of lighting. The window is always positioned in the same place in the studio, and he might redecorate the room either in his mind, and therefore translate it to the canvas, or physically redecorate the room, but the window is always in the same place. It's always the same corner of the studio, and it's always the same, for lack of a better word, lens that he's using to visualize that scene, because the characters tend to be basically the same size. And yet the light is always such wonderful low contrast and beautiful soft transition, large source. And it's the kind of light that we now try to emulate best with our light modifiers, the Chimiras and the Westcotts and the Photoflexes, the devices that we put on our conventional fixtures in order to soften them up and produce a volume through propagation that increases and diffuses that light and lets it find its way into all the deep shadows and just lower that contrast and extend that dynamic range. So I think the first thing that I would look for if I was going to shoot on location would be some wonderful window light opportunities for these particular reasons. It offers us the best exposure, the nicest shape, accurate color quality, so we can get texture and tone amply with light coming through a window. And I mean, take a look at the general tone of this lighting. I mean, if I look directly into my source, it has a sort of a hopeful openness to it. And if I turn and if I address the camera, I can introduce more contrast just by turning away from the key. And the more I turn from that key, the more contrast I can introduce into the image as well. So I can position my subject in a way that best utilizes the look and feel of this source, and then take full advantage of that to camera. And the results are pretty amazing. So seek a window whenever you go to location. If you can take advantage of that wonderful source, by all means. Now, we can reproduce this. That's part of the art and craft of cinematic lighting. And we'll talk about this more throughout the semester, how to produce believable, true-looking results with artificial sources, either on stage or at location. Because the one issue that you're going to have dealing with window light on location, if you're using the real sun, is the sun tracks across the sky. So as that sun angle changes outside that window, the appearance of this light is going to change as well. Now, this is an eastern-facing window. So in the morning, in the early hours of the day, hard sun's going to come through this window at a really low raking angle and create deep contrast, saturated colors, which are warmer in tone, heavy shadows, because it's harder light and coming directly through the window. It's currently late afternoon. And I chose this hour particularly to shoot this window because now the sun has tracked across the roof on my house, and it's now shining on the western side of my home where I don't have any windows entering this room. So what I have coming through this window now is very passive, reflected ambience. It's just such a huge volume that it's still coming through the window like a wonderful source. And I'm shooting at a beautiful deep stop. So I'm at about a 5.6 on a 24 millimeter Rokinon. And the results I think are pretty amazing. So as a matter of course, it's important to scout your locations, look for those window opportunities, scout your locations, and decide, okay, what time of day is this window going to give me the best quality of light? Is it going to be in the morning? Is that what the script calls for? Or would it be better in the afternoon when basically the shape of this light isn't going to change much once the direct sun has arced over the house and I'm getting the indirect passive light? It's going to look more or less the same for a number of hours before the sun starts going down in the west, changing color and getting lower in the sky, where the angles are a lot like they are in the morning, very low and raky and hard. In that situation, then definitely this exposure will change. It'll change in terms of color, intensity, and contrast. But it's more sustainable for more hours as an indirect, what we call north light exposure. And we can, we can get a scene off using window light in the afternoon if it's not directly lit by the sun. So scout your locations and make sure that those windows are in the right places at the right time of day, and plan your day accordingly so you can maximize the time and the quality of light that's coming through the window. And then think about supplementing that exposure to prolong the amount of time that you have with this source in this condition. So I might have a few large conventionals outside the window so that when the sun finally does get really low and it's not the right color and intensity anymore, I can introduce my lights in and sort of continue this look with a lot of diffusion and some very large sources, and extend my shooting day as a result of that. So you've either got to be very practical with your time and get your stuff shot within, say, 2 or 3 hours of having this kind of exposure, or if you need a full day, a full 12-hour shooting day, plan on adding some conventionals outside that window to help you extend that amount of time that you can shoot with this light source. Okay, and then if you're doing all of that, then you're operating at a pretty high level, which if you're working on a large feature film, that's the only way to go in a situation like this, is to track the sun, take careful notes, go on location ahead of time, plan your shooting day, and then maximize your time with that source, and then add supplementals if you need to extend your shooting day. Okay, so that's window lighting for all intents and purposes, and of course we'll continue to have this discussion throughout the semester, and this concept will evolve as we learn about more concepts and more tools at our disposal. Okay, so thanks for checking it out, and I'll talk to you again soon.